Well, hello there, everyone. This is Snackbox. I'm really excited for this week. I've been looking forward to it for a number of weeks here. As those of you who are here know already, we are going to be talking about women in the Colorado Trail. And I think this is a really important topic for a lot of different reasons. And it's not just for the women in the crowd. I think this is also an important topic for people like me and people who don't always understand what it means to be a woman hiking the trail and sort of the ways we can be community members that are better to those folks who are in our community. So I'm really excited about this talk. It's also really important to me as a just a person who loves the outdoors. And if you know anything about my personal interest in terms of work and research, I do a lot of work on gender in the environment. And the Colorado Trail is a specific and a really interesting example of the ways that gender can shape the way we engage with the outdoors. It's one of the few American long trails that was founded by a woman, as you all know, with Judy Gaskill, and just an incredible space. It's something that I think we all hold sort of near and dear to our hearts. And I think that this is a really interesting kind of topic for us to think about as we're looking ahead. So some of you might have hiked the trail already, and hopefully you see some familiar faces here. Some of you might not have hiked the trail and are looking ahead to hike the trail and hoping to hear some things that are beneficial to you as you look ahead to your through hike, say in 2022, or maybe even beyond that. And whoever you are, whatever you're interested in, I think we're going to have something for you with this. And I've got 4 really fascinating guests. We've got every bit of hiking experience covered here. We've got people who've hiked it all the way through, start to finish. We've got some lashers in the group. We've got people who have segment hiked it. And so we'll talk a little bit about what all that means. But let me go ahead and start introducing some of our esteemed and just interesting guests here. They are some of my favorite people that I've met throughout the way, and some of my newest favorite people here. And I'm excited about this one. So without further ado, let's start here. I want to bring to your attention. This is Brenda Freckles Bennett, and Brenda Freckles Bennett is a new friend of mine. She's a paper collage artist from Lakewood, Colorado, and really fascinated by that career choice. That could be its own broadcast in and of itself. Completed the CT in 2021 and started segment hiking it about 4 or 5 years ago. It's hiked the CT Sobo and done some of the stretches Novo, and so really grateful for your time here. Welcome, Brenda.
Thank you.
Brenda, can we ask how you got the trail name?
I have freckles all over, and in the sun they just get amplified and brighter. And so I was originally given a trail name of The Giver. I met up with some friends for a training hike, and I had brought them coffee and chocolate, and they were just so enamored with my generosity. But it didn't fit right. It felt like old handcuff from the past of being overly giving and too much information. But so I've changed it to Freckles, and I'm going to beg the CT organization to change my certificate to my real trail name.
That's terrific. Yeah, I should have guessed Freckles, but I'm glad that you kept oversharing, because I'm glad to hear that there's this other name that didn't fit, and yes. I think that's really terrific. And Cool Quest there says they say they love the name, and if they've said that they love a name, you know it's a good one there, and they're good people to have in your corner there. I want to then cut over here. We're going to bring in a favorite of mine from last summer's through hike here. We've got CT Mom, or Cool Trail Mom. I love the CT Mom, the sort of Colorado Trail or Cool Trail Mom. And CT Mom and I, we hiked a good stretch together back in last year. We hiked from Lake City all the way over to, gosh, where was it? It was end of segment 24. Stony Pass. That's right. And CT Mom is a lasher. So that, for those of you who are new to long distance hiking, lashing stands for long ass section hike. And so would spend a number of weeks over the summer hiking long stretches of the trail. And CT Mom is finished up this year and is headed out to do the John Muir Trail with her Tramily in July. Is it July 6th is your launch, somewhere in that ballpark?
Yeah.
That's a terrific. It's an incredibly northbound. Yep, Novo is the way to go on the JMT. In my opinion, that's the way I went. So CT Mom, tell us a little bit about that trail name. How did you procure such a dignified name?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went through a few trail names that just didn't stick over the years, and like one that was just like Golden Whitney, and like it wasn't enough, you know. And then this year I spent such a good long chunk and on the trail, and my Tramily in Lake City, I was like cleaning up Raven's Rest and making sure everyone had eaten. And so that's the mom part. And then I'm a mom, but I'm significantly cooler than most moms because I bring vodka on trail and make cocktails at camp. So I swear like a sailor. So
I have
real mom.
Yeah, I have a feeling that our friends up in Michigan, Cool Quest, are going to be really, really enamored with who you are as a hiker. They like tequila though; they're not vodka drinkers, if I remember correctly. There, great, thank you, there, CT Mom. Let's bring in here. We've got Christina Trekkie. Christina Trekkie's been backpacking for over 20 years. That means has a solid 10 years experience on me here. So I'm looking forward to learning quite a bit from your experience hiking. Through Hike the Trail in 2020 and is section hiking portions of it this year, and is doing another chunk this year. Do you know which chunk you're going to take on this year, or you're still deciding?
No, actually, so I section hiked over half of it with a friend, and then she had to leave due to time constraints. So I finished out the rest solo, and she has committed to finishing it in sections going forward. So the last section she has that I'll be joining her on is going to be starting at section 24 through till Durango.
Beautiful.
So that's what we'll be doing this summer.
Yeah, that's a great stretch through there. And one of the things that Christina is going to bring to the table here is the idea that hiking with a dog can be really, really a great experience on the Colorado Trail. And I happen to know somebody who's done quite a bit of adventuring on the dog trail front. You could say somebody with a girl plus dog adventures is somebody I know pretty closely who's done the whole trail with her dog. And so we're going to be interested to hear what you have to say about hiking with a dog and the unique challenges that presents. And again, I think that's going to be really helpful to us. One of the things you mentioned there, though, Christina, that I think serves as a nice segue here is that you hiked most of it with somebody. And the person I'm going to bring in here is Debbie of Mad Hippie's Life. And Debbie has hiked the entire trail, did the entire trail with her partner, Miller. And I want to give a quick shout out here that if you've not seen Mad Hippie's Life on YouTube, their videos of the Colorado Trail are absolutely phenomenal. For those of you who are heading out on the trail this year, it will give you a huge amount of confidence going forward, knowing what you have to look forward to. I know a lot of people have different takes where some people don't want to see the trail before they take off. I'm the opposite because I think they're all so spectacular. Show me the trail, show me the beautiful scenes. I want to see your campsites. I want to see what it's like. And they're really calming videos too. I think they have a really nice pacing to them. So check those out. And so what I want to ask Debbie is tell us a little bit about the name of your channel and a little bit about the sort of vision that you have for your channel. So folks who are here can get a sense of what they'll get if they head over that way after the live stream.
Well, the channel's sort of an experiential channel. That was how it started. And we've been backpacking and hiking we've been together 40 years. So we've been doing this, with our children, with our dogs. So I think the direction is we're going to continue just documenting our journey. That's the goal of it. I guess documenting, exploring, and sharing everything we do daily. And so like the MAD, we were talking about that earlier. It stands for Miller and Debbie, and we started this in high school. And it's just who we are. And so that's the entire point of the channel. And when we documented the trail, that was the point as well, was to go back and see it all, for everyone to see what we saw and to share what touched us, if that makes sense.
That absolutely does. And for those of you who are here in the live stream, there are terrific videos specifically in the Colorado area. And one of the things that I love about your channel, Debbie, is that you tend to hit some of those places that are, you do a lot of state park stuff and you do a lot of hikes that are really accessible. So, when a lot of people think of hiking in Colorado, they often think, Rocky Mountain National Park or the CT. And there's so many great opportunities out there. You can throw a stick anywhere in Colorado and hit a great hike. So I really appreciate that your channel capitalizes on the idea that there's so many of those terrific ones out there. So grateful for that. Well, let's dive right into it. Is everybody ready for some questions? We're going to ask the tough questions here. All right. My first question is, as a man, when I see women doing things wrong, what can I do to tell them how to do it right? I'm not being serious about that, by the way.
Don't do that.
I'm not serious in the least. No. So I obviously I'm just joking there, but it's actually one of those things that I feel like is maybe a little more common than people think. So one of the questions that I had that I mentioned to you all is I wanted to hear if there were any stories of what we're going to call campsplaining here, which is kind of like a backcountry version of mansplaining. So have there been any examples in your experience of people telling you how to do something obvious or something you're clearly good at or better than the person who's trying to explain it to you? Does anybody have an example of something similar to that?
Yeah, mine's I mean, which one? So this one's a little awkward, but I was walking down what's that river after, like, before Mullis Pass, after the Beaver, like
Animus?
Yeah, the Animus, which had the huge, spill, the mining spill, and you're not supposed to drink out of it.
Yep.
And I'm walking up, and there's this dude, and he's like not wearing any clothes. He's like in the shortest of shorts and this unbuttoned shirt. And I'm like, he's filtering water out of the Animus. I'm like, hey man, like, just so you know, we're not supposed to drink out of there. And he's like, that was like 5 years ago. And glares at me, and I'm like, okay, like, you do you, man. Like, have fun with whatever cancer that gives you.
Right.
So there's mansplaining, and there's also not listening to women.
What?
Well,
Brenda, or Freckles rather, it looked like you had something you had an answer to that as well.
I actually have had really good, respectful interactions with people in general on the trail. I get a lot, as a soloist, I get a lot of whispers behind me, like, she's by herself, and it just gives me a little boost of pride. Like, yeah, I am out here doing this on my own, and it's not so bad. And so that's more the reaction I'm getting. I've been solo a lot and not interacting with that many people, so I haven't been blessed with any mansplaining.
That's terrific news, and I think that you're right that there's a certain sense of pride that comes with going out on your own, and I think that's pretty terrific. And we're going to dig into that a little more deeply, I believe, in the hour here. We're going to ask some questions about that confidence and how you built that confidence, for sure. What about Trekkie over there? Do you have any examples of anything that you've experienced? 20 years in the backcountry, I would imagine you've probably had your fair share of people drinking from the Animus.
Interesting observation. So the majority of my backpacking experience has actually been solo, and my observation has been that I think men are a little more respectful if you're solo. Like the campsplaining situations I found tend to be when you're with a group of women more than when I'm solo. I have some good examples outside of camp. One thing I would say is, I understand the desire to help. And to make sure that people aren't in a dangerous situation, ask before you just start telling someone or expecting them to not know.
Right. I think you're spot on about that. And one of the things is, I was sharing this with my partner earlier today that, I had a similar situation to what you just described, where I was camping at Cataract Lake. This was in 2020, and camping at Cataract Lake, and there was a lasher for the CDT came through, and she was retired, and I want to say she told us she was maybe 72, and for the next 15 minutes she told me how everything I was doing was wrong, and I brought the wrong tent, and then the kicker though was she started asking me, she was going Nobo and I was heading Sobo, and she started asking me for beta about the trail and where she could camp, and it took everything in me not to say, I thought you were the one who knew everything. So, so that's but I think you're right that there are certain dynamics there that are important. But I think the real takeaway there, Trekkie, is that asking goes a long way. And it's also really important to, let people do what they do. I mean, I think of all the mistakes that I've made in the past, and kind of to your point, I like that you pointed out, as long as people aren't hurting themselves or hurting the environment, then it's a good policy to have, I think. Now we've got a comment here and it's going to be a good transition. This one comes over from Miller, who says, hiking as a couple has taught me, Miller, that I'm not the only one. And I need to listen to her as much as my own. And so I'm curious here. I don't want to put you on the spot about the mansplaining, but tell us a little bit about what you've learned in the last 40 years, adventuring with Miller and adventuring with a partner, and sort of that give and take of hiking with somebody and having that compromise play out on the trail.
It ultimately worked out really well. We developed a rhythm, but in the beginning, with every hike, we have to sort of find that footing, and there is that sort of grace, I guess, you give each other, and you share what you're feeling. But it has its challenges when he has his rhythm, he has his way, I have mine, and we have to, but we've been together so long, we tend to fall into that pretty easily. So.
Yeah.
We kind of know.
It's a real challenge, I think, for any hiking partners to really kind of figure out how each other operates and where your strengths are. And I mean, I think it's just one of those things that takes a long time, and it takes a lot of, I like that you use that word grace, Debbie, because I think ultimately when you're hiking with somebody, it goes a long way to assume the best and that people want the best from you. And so I want to point out here that 5-Star asked the question, and this is him being silly, but I'm leading up to something, so you think you'll appreciate it. This is 5-Star said, how can people get better at mansplaining? At which point, my personal favorite YouTuber said they could help explain to me how to carry my pack and then carry it for me. That would definitely help, and I think that's pretty spot on. And so I think ultimately it's about finding out how people hike and what works best and where you can push farther and where you need to know. And I think often it happens in terms of how far you hike and the pace that you go and when you're taking breaks. I think that's a really good litmus test for a lot of people hiking with a team, because if you can't figure out that, then the rest of it's going to be really, really hard. Great. I want to talk a little bit. I think this is a really good opportunity for us to talk about the idea here of confidence. And I want to talk about how you built up your confidence. And we have arguably 4 of the most experienced hikers in Colorado in our presence right now. So I want to know a little bit about the process of building up confidence. If you can speak to things that maybe made you nervous in the past that don't make you nervous anymore. So what do you think? What about confidence? How would you recommend building confidence, and what did you do to build it for yourself?
I'll start. For me, I prepare. And I had a lot of obstacles with people being so concerned for me and telling me all the reasons why I shouldn't go on trail, which does not build confidence, right? So I had to overcome those obstacles before even getting on trail. And I have used Miller and Debbie's videos to prepare for my personal hikes, and I've watched other trekkers as well. And it's like you listen to the fear that you have to help you prepare, but I also give equal ear to the voice of logic and courage and reason, and it balances all of that out. And so I was thinking about this, and I remember the first time I slept without a rain fly. Like, that was a really big deal for me. That thin sheet just gives you that little hidey hide, and to not sleep with a rain fly one night was a big deal for me. And I just felt like $1 million the next day because I had the courage to try it. And it's just little things like that, learning from others, putting it into practice, and coming out the other side of my section hike, feeling really empowered and just more knowledgeable.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of the little victories, right? Because I think, the sleeping without a rain fly is a big deal. And the first time you sleep outside, it's sort of like when you were a kid and you thought there was a monster in the room, so you'd hide under your blanket as if there were a monster, that was going to protect you. But those little victories are really big. And ultimately, it's good for people to hear that sort of the balance that you just mentioned, where there are plenty of things that you need to be prepared for, right? And you need to be ready to handle lightning storms safely. That's definitely a danger. But you also need to be ready to handle the most beautiful views you've ever seen, and sort of see what you're capable of and the strength that you possess. I think all of those are really, they're really nice points and really nice balance to what we're talking about at this point.
Yeah.
Anyone else have some ideas for building confidence or the things you did to build confidence? CT Mom, I see you taking, I think you're ready.
I think it was a lot of shakedown hikes. Like, just, before you take on a long trail, do some backpacking. Whether that was, when you were a teenager or whatever, if you have experience or not, it just helps. And it helps everyone. That's not gendered, obviously, but especially for solo, which I was solo like for 4 years mostly. And just sleeping outside or being able to disconnect and not worry about what's going on at home. If you have kids or you have, mom and dad you take care of, or whatever it is, that's hard on us ladies, especially because of the, just the emotional work that we do and the way that we have been taught to lead our lives. And so I think that was hard. And that took doing it, not like watching the videos, doing all the planning, all the stuff, but doing it and then being like, oh, I didn't die, so I'm okay. And then that gave me, just continually doing it. And I failed a bunch of times. And each of those failures was learning and confidence building. So.
Yeah, and just to highlight that one piece that I think is really critical for everybody is to be cognizant of the type of emotional labor people in your hiking group are doing, because I think that's one of the morale things that can really make or break a group hike is if there's one person who's feeling that pressure to hold everything together, and often that person ends. Often it tends to be women who do it, do the emotional labor. I think that's pretty consistent, sort of culturally speaking, but also that idea of doing those preparatory hikes, that's not something that's gendered, but it just helps people to do shakedown hikes. And I think that can be really good for dialing in your gear for sure. What about you, Debbie? Do you built up your confidence and pretty much a pro hiker at this point, right?
Well, I don't feel like that, but based on what they both said, the same thing. I thought that was interesting too. The more preparation I have, the better I feel. I'm an over planner, and I don't need to, but I feel more confident. And then going out and doing it, having that experience, and then the same as CT Mom said. And my kids are grown; I have grandkids. And when you see me on the phone, I have to laugh on all the CT videos. I had to check in. Anytime there was a signal, I had to check in. And so just finding the little things, but getting out though, and knowing that I had planned for every scenario when I was out there, knowing that I had that helped me a lot. Miller was a little more free form. I mean, he was a super planner, but at the same time, he was more willing to go with the flow. And I think that helped. And when you got out and you did it and you got up the next day and you were proud. I did this. I'm okay. I'm able to do this. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Just experience.
Yeah, I think it speaks to my personal experience where, the first time I went camping by myself, it was a car camping campground in South Dakota, and I didn't have good gear, and I actually was setting up my tent, and it was to the point that I didn't even have a flashlight. I had my cell phone, and this was before cell phones had the flashlight app, right? And so it's freezing cold. I'm nervous, and I'm a rule follower. I'm setting up my tent in the RV spots when I'm supposed to be in a different campground. And in the middle of this sort of super still South Dakota night, I heard a tiny voice call out to me and was just like, hello. And so my heart starts thumping, and I think they're like gremlins, like legitimately grown man thinking they're gremlins or fairies. And I'm having this like, my heart's thumping. I'm looking around everywhere and it keeps calling out. And then it finally says my name. And my first thought, honest to God, was they have magic. I don't know what they are, but they have magic. They know my name. I had butt dialed my friend while I was using the cell phone as a light. And because it was so still, I could hear it crystal clear. But the whole point here is that, that experience really did matter, because now, I went camping last night and I thought I heard something outside the tent and my heart didn't race at all. I shined my flashlight around and called out into the stillness, and I was fine and went right back to sleep. But that took years, right? It took a long time to get to that point where I felt comfortable enough to sleep in those situations. And so giving yourself that opportunity, and then sort of reiterating a little bit of what CT Mom said there, is that there are going to be times that things don't go well. And what I always lean back on is, those days are those are the best hikes or best stories when things don't go well. You'd never have a story where you're like, I had this great hike and everything went fine. It's always the ones that kind of go sideways. What about you, Trekkie? What kind of things did you do to build your confidence over the years?
It's going to be a similar story. I would say experience was really big. So first couple years, especially going solo, was pretty scary. Spending the night in the tent out in the middle of nowhere and hearing all those sounds. There was a year or two where I didn't sleep well out in the middle of woods. And then again, being a solo female, I would actually almost get more skeeved out by humans near me, especially when I'm the only female in that area. But doing it over and over and over again. And then the other really big component for me has been those challenges, those times where I could have died and I made it through. And it was because of me that I made it through. Like that builds a lot of confidence.
Do you have a good example you can share with us of one of those times when something got really kind of gnarly?
So many. I will say probably one of the early experiences that was really terrifying. I'm actually a Minnesota native, so a lot of my backpacking was in the Boundary Waters, which is a wilderness area, very remote, and some really treacherous weather in that area. And I remember solo backpacking. We had an incredible thunderstorm. Like there was trees crashing around all night long. It actually shattered all of the poles in my tent and like ripped my tent off of me. So like living through that overnight and keeping myself and a dog alive, and it was hypothermic conditions. That I wouldn't choose to do it again, but that gave me a lot more confidence that I was capable of facing something like that.
Yeah. Wow. That's I have nothing to add to that. That's incredible. Terrifying just to hear that. But happy you made it in the pup as well.
I saved the tent poles. Just I could not believe when I had light the next morning and I looked at them. I was like, that is unbelievable.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a memory that you'll keep with you for the rest of your life, right? I want to ask this question here. This is from Happy Storm. Happy Storm shares that she still feels anxiety each time she goes into the woods, and so I think it sounds like here the experience is going to be useful, and so if you all have anything that you'd like to add to this sort of narrative, or at least what Happy Storm's experiencing. What I'm hearing here is that Happy Storm is where all of us have been early in our hiking careers. Does that sound accurate?
I mean, I've never had a time going out where I didn't still feel significant anxiety, either before trail or on trail. So I think it's just that the thing for confidence building for that is, for me, is what worked was breath work and meditation. And so I trained my brain and then fell back on those mantras and those things, which my body was already prepared for to reduce anxiety. And I could turn back to them on trail. And that was a big difference between like year 1 and year 5 of the CT for me, was the mental training. The only other recommendation I have for that is the Pacific Crest Trials book by Zach whatever of the Trek. What's his last name? That guy.
I think.
Yeah, and that's got a really good worksheet in there and that sort of thing. If you're, because it is, for women, I think it is a lot to go into the woods by themselves. For men, it obviously is too, but we are certainly not supposed to.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, CT Mom, and it goes back to a little bit of what Freckles mentioned a while ago, that there are going to be people who tell you shouldn't, or they'll build up that anxiety before you ever head off into the woods. And I think that it has to be more common for women than men, because I don't hear that nearly as much anymore. I heard it the first time I went on a trip. People would ask me, for instance, if I was carrying a gun, and then that was about the extent of it. Are you carrying a gun? No. Well, good luck, right? But I think that there's that previous the pre-planning stage where people can psych you out, and I think that's important to know. But I want to emphasize again that part that you mentioned, that positive, the way that you talk to yourself during these moments really matters. And it's always really important to focus, sort of like what Trekkie was saying, to highlight and think about the ways that you are succeeding, even in these times that the trip doesn't go the way that you want, talking to yourself. And this isn't gender specific. This is really it's just how you become a hiker. You focus, you say, you know what, I solved that problem. I got through that storm. I did these things well. And even when something doesn't go right, focusing in on that can be really critical. Now let's switch gears here for just a minute. I do want to talk a little bit about the idea of safety. This one is common, and I think I'm excited about this part because I feel like we're all going to do a really good job of not making people nervous, but making people aware of the things that are legitimately something to be concerned about. So I want to ask each of you if you have sort of a safety tip and this can be anything. This can be anything from a tip to finding rides in and out of town, to bear safety, to joining up with a Tramily, that kind of thing. How do you handle safety, or what would you recommend to people just starting out and nervous about safety? And let me throw another curveball in here. Quite a few people have mentioned to me that they are, especially women have mentioned that they're having a hard time getting their family support. So how would you talk to them about talking to their family to get their family support before they take off on an adventure like this? So a lot of different questions that you can approach it with. I'm interested in hearing all of your many answers. So fire away.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts on safety. It's a different angle. It's about lightning safety. That was a fear I had. And my mother, when we did the CT, she was petrified. She said, well, are you going to be struck, that you're up high, and that was something. And so I studied, I read, I learned, I knew that if we were in segment 23, where could we go? We're doing Snow Mesa, which was that I was petrified, or of course, Indian Trail Ridge, to study and to prepare. And I explained to my mother everything we were doing for safety, all the different tools we had learned, techniques we had learned, how we would approach it. And of course I had a Garmin, so I assured her she could reach me and I could reach her or anyone for help. So I think that was the preparation. It goes back to that preparation, I think.
That's great. And really thinking through that Garmin. So there's been a lot of talk about that. How many of you all carried a Garmin or a Zoleo, something of the sort? Yep. There's been a lot of discussion about the Garmin and the Zoleo. Does anyone have a preference in terms of Garmin, Zoleo? And my partner used a Zoleo and really loved it. I was partial to it because I was able to just kind of keep track of her progress as she made her way to Durango. Any thoughts on those two items?
So I started with a Spot back in the day. And I thought that was great. I could tell my husband to pick me up or whatever if I was in danger. But I switched to the Garmin this year, and it was a game changer mentally for me to be able to just shoot off a text and get a text back. Mental state completely different. Loved it. Highly recommend. I've not done the Zoleo. I know that people have. I mean, my understanding is that it's just slightly cheaper, but basically the same thing. But after going through a couple classes on the Garmin website, there's a lot more features with the Garmin. So it's really just what you need as far as maps and weather updates and these sorts of, if you want to be part of the Iridium net, all that stuff. So I would just look into those differences for the savings of a few bucks. I mean, they're all expensive, honestly. So.
Yeah, I think it's also helpful for kind of what you were talking about earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, CT Mom, but that sort of that pressure that you feel when you leave, especially as women, if you leave family behind, that like I remember you had a daughter and then maybe a son that was younger, and so feeling like you've got some connection there, and so not necessarily so disconnected from those people for whom you care about, right? I think that can be helpful for that mental game. And I'm a total mama's boy, so I get it. That's my MO. Great. Any other thoughts on the Garmin or Zoleo, or we can move back over to the just general safety if you'd like. All right. What about other safety considerations? What else do you think that we should be considering as we're talking about safety or moving ahead with safety?
One thing that I think doesn't get said enough to females in outdoor environment is to trust your instincts. you've actually been conditioned by culture your entire life to make other people feel better. And that means letting your own comfort get invaded. Like instead of telling somebody to back off and get away from you, you'll try to dance around the situation. But trust your instincts. You know, they're one of your best skill sets.
Yeah, I think that's really huge. And especially that second part that you mentioned, the sort of the conditioning, and that this is not a time where you can let other people's feelings get in the way of your own safety. It is complicated because, if you have somebody who is making you feel uncomfortable, there's that added consideration in terms of, how do they respond if I tell them that I need this space? And so that's something that I think for the men in the audience, or the people who don't identify as women, for them to recognize is that, that giving people their space, or sort of kind of treating strangers in some respects kind of like you would a house cat, right? That if they want to be around you, make sure that they have the opportunity to be around you, but they come to you, kind of thing, I think is just generally good policy. I don't know if that's absolutely the sort of gospel truth in terms of making people feel comfortable, but I do think sort of the glomming on with somebody who doesn't want you around is not good practice. I think that's just generally not good in general. Any other thoughts? What about so Freckles? Tell us a little bit about your sense of sort of safety, or how people can stay safe, or talk to their families about feeling safe when they're out on the trail.
Yeah, I had a lot of opposition, and things like animal predators came up, and injury, and then psycho killers on the trail were all legitimate concerns of my family. And I would speak to them about how I was preparing and going to counter each of those things if it came up, and being bear alert and really fastidious with my scent, and keeping clean camp, and hanging a bag, or I even used a bear canister for a little while. Just talking to my family about how I'm going to counter each of those dangers, and how I'll be preparing my body physically so that I'm not going to be as susceptible to injury. And here's how I will prepare and not get wet in that deluge of a thunderstorm so that I won't be hypothermic that night. No, thank you. And yeah, just countering each of their concerns with how I would be preparing is what assuaged their worries. And then ultimately getting a satellite tracker so that my family could track my location and receive messages from me that I'm safe in camp for the night, or I'm doing well. Those were all ways for me to overcome those obstacles.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and also considering the fact that when you're on the CT, I had a student. I teach, for those of you who don't know, I'm a college professor, and I was teaching, and I had a student who wanted to go hike the CT, and his parents were very concerned about his safety. And I remember one of the things that sort of won them over was I mentioned to them two things. One is that on the trail, you're more likely to run into people who are ready to help you in a bad situation than somebody who wants to hurt you, far more likely. But also, one of the things that's really great is, you're also, if you're out there, you're more likely to be the person who helps somebody. And so reframing it to be not that you're the sort of the recipient of bad treatment, but you can actually be the person who is helping others. And I thought that really helped with my student. And again, I don't want to necessarily imply that your job is to go out there and be giving, and to the point that, as Brenda mentioned earlier, that it's taking away from your own comfort or sort of who you are. But I think it's helpful to know that it generally is a community that's looking out for you. And speaking of that community, I want to turn to CT Mom and talk a little bit about the idea of joining a Tramily, because this is a spot, whenever you go out into the woods, you meet a group of strangers, and it's one of my favorite things. You sit around a campfire, and I love looking around the campfire and thinking, what kind of crazy coincidences on this planet did it take over my 40 years to end up sitting around this campfire with this group of 7 people from very different backgrounds? But tell us a little bit, CT Mom, about what kind of things did you look for to make sure you felt safe in your Tramily? And obviously they seem to be friends for life. You're heading off back into the woods with them in just 3.5, 4 short months. Tell us a little bit about how you met them and how you felt safe, and sort of that mental process of what Trekkie was talking about, trusting your instincts.
Yeah, I think that I'm chatty and friendly on trail, and that Colorado, like I stop and talk to everybody. So, but the biggest thing with a Tramily is there's two sides to it, where one, you've got that support, and a lot of times, and I think there was recently on the PCT survey, they were talking about how people in a Tramily will, you have this idea that if the whole group's upset, then it'll just like spill over, right? If one person has a bad day, it'll spill over. But actually, everyone's on their own tracks, and so you kind of balance that out, and that helps mental game wise. And then it always helps to be chasing someone or having someone pushing from behind, or just for speed in general. But yeah, I met my Tramily at the Ravens Rest, and then in Lake City. And then we all just sort of ended up, weird, just everyone ended up kind of together in two different groups, and then one big group again. And, I think we're more alike than different out there. There's got to be some weird random thread that attracts all of us crazies to this life. So, yeah, it did provide safety, though. I mean, especially for hitchhiking. So I know that's a big concern. And so I would just, I don't hitch alone. That's just who I am. Plenty of people can and are comfortable with that. I also love hitching. But I will just wait at the trailhead for a little bit, a little bit before the trailhead, just kind of wait for somebody, kind of use that intuition. And I call it like turning on my like city self, where on trail, I'm totally chill. Everything's fine. Nothing bad's going to happen to me. But that city self, when you're near campgrounds, road junctions, hitching, and in town, get that in touch with that intuition, that piece of you. So that's, a little less with the Tramily, but definitely still a thing I keep in mind.
Well, that hitching is that's one of the most common questions I get. Just sort of people shooting messages to me on Instagram asking me about how they get to and from different places. And it's one I don't honestly feel like I have a great answer for, because I generally feel safe, but I also, I'm a 40-year-old dude. And if somebody wants to take me out on the side of the road, then it's probably going to happen one way or another. But it's a very different experience for us. I mean, that socialization that Trekkie was talking about. Trekkie, can you talk to us a little bit about sort of how you handled transportation to and from trail, and what your approach was as a solo hiker?
Bit of an outlier here. We were doing it in the middle of the pandemic, so there was a lot of question as to how comfortable people would be. I was also doing it with a dog, which I think is another factor as to whether hitchhiking is an option or not. So when I had my friend with me, we actually had two vehicles, and we leapfrogged the vehicles. And so just resupplied at the vehicles as we went. When she had to go, I actually prearranged my rides, again, with the pandemic and with having a dog on hand in mind.
Yeah. I mean, it adds a whole different layer of complication having a pup with you, and a little bit of planning ahead. It's one of the nice parts about the Colorado Trail specifically is that if you need to plan ahead, you can certainly do so. It's one that makes it a little more complicated because you probably need to take a little more conservative pace to get from place to place, but certainly very doable. And I would encourage just about anybody. One of the things that I've heard as a recommendation, especially for younger women hiking the trail, if their family's nervous, say, listen, if you're nervous about specifically the hitching, here's the shuttlers list. You can help me pay for shuttles. And that way, who I'm riding with and where they're picking me up, and what their phone number is. That kind of thing can be really helpful. And then
the Colorado Trail actually has a great resource for that. Like
really
there's usually 4 or 5 shuttlers available in each location.
That's spot on. Yeah, it's a really great one to have that shuttlers list. And all you do, for those of you watching, you go to the Colorado Trail website. There's a page that says shuttlers and trail angels. And there's a little box you type in your email, and you can do it now, just test it out. But then do it again before you start the trail, and it'll give you an updated list, and it'll fire one right out to you. It's specifically really helpful for arranging those rides. And Lori Mead made a great point here, is that chatting up people who are day hikers is a really good way to, and especially if you feel comfortable. There are a lot of people who you'll often know, I don't want to speak for anybody in terms of their comfort level, but speaking with people, you can often get a good sense of who they are, and whether or not you'd feel safe. And then also the cell service. Happy Storm asked about cell service with Verizon, which is certainly the better service on the trail, but typically you're not going to have service even in most of the passes. For example, the picture behind me is Hope Pass. I think I had some service there, but it's really, really tough to get that service. So that's why you want to plan ahead a couple of days out. But if you are hiking, every time you go to trail towns, you can stop when you do your resupply and set up your ride for the next one. And that's my personal recommendation, because if you try planning it now, to Trekkie's point about the storm that rolled in out of nowhere, or CT Mom's experience joining a Tramily, you don't know what's going to change your pace, or what kind of factor is going to push you to go faster than you want, or slow down a little bit. So I think just planning as you get to towns where you do have service is a good idea. I want to pause for a minute, and I want to talk a little bit about one specific type of safety that I've seen a lot of questions asked. This one is, again, not gender specific, but I want to turn it to Debbie here. A question that I get asked more often than any other is bear canister, bear bag. What do you do about that stretch from Stony Pass all the way down to the Elk Creek Basin, where you don't have trees? You're up 32 miles above tree line. What kind of thought process? I don't know if you have a recommendation, but maybe a philosophy for making that decision. What would you recommend?
No, we used a bear bag the whole way. And when we were above tree line, we took the bag out and held it down by rocks. And we've done that other times as well. So it's not really, we didn't have an issue with that. And I know that some people have different views of what to do with the bag, but that's what we did. And we've used a bear canister, not on the CT, but in other places. But there, you can find rocks to hold it down. You can away from your tent. That wasn't an issue for us at all. And I want to go back a little bit, talk about the Tramily and the shuttlers list. Before we went, because I'm such an over planner, I actually contacted every potential person in the towns and told them roughly. And I know that there's so many variables, but when we'd be there and had contact information, and now we just kept checking it with them. And I even had the one person in Durango already planned, and I would keep checking in with her. This is where we are. This is what's happening. And these people are so wonderful and so kind. So we never had a problem getting a ride. Like Miller always says, it could take an hour to tell you about the wonderful luck we had on the trail and about how the trail provides. So with all of these things, when you get out there, all of these questions seem to just fall into place. I don't know, like even with what you do with your bear bag, it seemed to fall into place for us. And everything there was a place, there was a way everywhere we went. So it's not as daunting.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it happened in my experience where, I was an over planner, and I mentioned that I did the collegiate loop years ago, and I took 4 different canisters of fuel for a hike that I anticipated would take no more than 12 days. So I had big canisters of fuel for each for 3 days because I was so nervous. But then what I learned is ultimately for most of these things, there's a way to solve a problem, and that you'll find that it kind of builds that confidence that Freckles was talking a little bit about that earlier, about that sort of sense of confidence and how you build it through small victories, right? Those little victories that you have throughout can be really helpful. Any other thoughts on safety before we move on to some of the other questions that we might have?
I just wanted to recommend, because the part of that question was for the support people at home. Yep. What to do with it is Juliana Chauncey has a book called Hiking from Home that is specifically geared towards your support people. So maybe check that out, and other resources that because this is a problem for all of us. I mean, I don't think any of our moms or husbands or sisters or, whatever wanted us out there, right? And I think it causes them a little bit of anxiety the whole time we're out there. So anything we can do beforehand to reduce that is, one, going to help them stay off your back, and two, help them feel better.
Yeah, that's a really great tip. I didn't know about that book by Chauncey, but she did segment hikes of the whole trail, and so she knows the trail pretty intimately and knows every step of it. I think she went west on her hike, and she's also the host of Backpacker Radio, the podcast, and they have a really great episode of this. I think Kinnick is here. That's Rolf, and he was on their show, but he also posted to the Facebook page an episode of theirs that was sort of along the same lines of what we're talking about here, considerations for women hikers, she would fit right in with this crowd of experienced hikers. So definitely would encourage you to check that out. I want to talk a little bit about gear here, and first with the idea of gear that you felt was specifically beneficial to you as a woman hiker. And so we're probably this is where we talk about like Kula cloths and P-rags and all that stuff that's not pertinent to my experience in the woods. So tell me a little bit about some gear that you think any woman heading off into the woods should have, or that you found specifically beneficial, if you feel comfortable talking to that effect.
Definitely a gun. No, just kidding. I'm joking. Oh, I just started stuff. Look at that. YouTube comments are going to be flying. Yeah, I mean, I use a menstrual cup. I try and plan around it. There's options. You could get, take an extra pack of birth control or whatever if that's your jam, or you try and plan around it. But it is a thing that we all kind of deal with. And I mean, I bring one just in case. You just never know.
Yeah.
Fairly easy to use, fairly easy to clean. Definitely a big learning curve. Please do it for 3 or 4 months before your hike. It is not something you want to try for the first time in the backcountry.
This is like a Diva Cup kind of situation.
Yeah, like any of those menstrual cups, Diva Cup, that sort of thing. And but fairly easy to deal with out there, honestly. Not a big deal.
Yeah, one of the nice things, I don't know a ton about it, but it's helpful because then you don't have waste to pack out with sanitary napkins or tampons or whatnot. And so those are what I've heard is similar experience, right? Anything else that you think would be useful for people heading off into the woods?
I will get on the Kula cloth train. Men can shake, and that's good enough. We need to be dry or we get pretty chafed, has been my experience. So whether you get a Kula cloth or just bring a cloth along. I love Kula cloth's owner and business model. So that's what I carry. But I do think that is a necessity. And boys, don't try to pull it off of our packs because we will laugh at you.
Yeah, for those of you who are here, if you're not familiar with the Kula Cloth Company, first of all, to Trekkie's point, it's a small business. It's really an incredible model. And the Kula Cloth is basically, it's like a little square of fabric with an antimicrobial. It sort of folds in half into triangle shape, but the inside is antimicrobial, so you can use it as what people used to carry, the sort of bandanas for pea cloth, right? That it's the same kind of concept, but it's now antimicrobial, which helps because then you don't end up with infections, which is for anybody hiking. I mean, ultimately, you have to stay clean or else you're going to end up, to Trekkie's point, you're going to chafe. This goes for men for just wiping in general as well, but also staying clean is great for preventing infection, and specifically things like yeast infections or jock itch if you're a man. Those are both pretty common, especially on the trail. But absolutely. And then there was something else here. So, Freckles, it looked like you were ready to chime in on something, so I was going to turn it over to you there.
Yeah, I'll say also that having your lady bits shaved is also going to help with keeping yourself cleaner. And I've used a backcountry bidet as well, like a self-squeezing bottle to spray and clean with, also just helps you feel fresher and helps just keep us nice and tidy.
Yep.
I would add to a difference I've noted between long distance hiking and just a week or two backpacking is I will actually bring baby wipes or some sort of antimicrobial wipe. If it's a week and there's water around, I'll just bathe in the water. That wasn't really a good option on long distance hiking. So especially if you are menstruating, I found that to be a necessity.
Right.
Something I did, now this seems, it was tedious, but I dehydrated a lot of
Yeah.
baby wipes,
Me
and,
too.
and it was amazing to have those when we got at camp at night. That was, my husband said, "Oh no, don't do that for me. That's no." I did, because I knew he'd want them, and sure enough, every night you would rehydrate them. But yeah, you go off trail, those dehydrated wipes were, to me, that gave me, it gave me you felt so good just to have that.
Yeah.
Felt clean, and to get all the dust and the dirt, and oh my gosh, and to go off trail. Yeah, when you have to relieve. Yeah.
That's I mean, this is the stuff that this is why I knew having this conversation would be helpful. I had no idea that you could dehydrate baby cloths.
Where you been, Snack Box? Where you been? We've been dehydrating baby webs for years over here.
Apparently.
Well, I will say the biologist in me, pay attention to what the baby wipe antimicrobial agent is, because if it's alcohol, it's not going to be antimicrobial anymore. But if it's bleach, you should have some effect to it.
Right.
That's a great tip. Can I ask, I don't know if anyone's had any experience here, but this one is one of my favorite comments, and people, I had a tinkle bell and loved it. Rite of passage to do it with your pack on. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the idea of a tinkle bell, it's basically it's a sort of a funnel setup where women can use it to pee while standing up, and it can save quite a bit of time actually when you're hiking to be able to use that and pee. Has anybody used one of those or had any experience with that?
I have tried it and I did not love it.
Okay.
Actually, one of my mansplaining moments or something not to do, gentlemen, I tried to actually go into the woods to use one, but it was near private property and I had a gentleman chasing me around trying to get me off of the property. So don't do that. I had a much harder time actually staying dry and clean with it.
Yeah.
But it works great for some people.
Yeah, I have to imagine that it's something that would just be sort of person by person and body by body, that it would work well for some people and maybe not for others as well. Are there any tips about sort of, I mean, it can go, you can think of this in a lot of ways, but any tips for just going to the bathroom in general, and that can be helpful, or finding a good spot, or this can go for men or women basically, but any tips that you would give for people if they're hiking the CT about maybe even finding a bathroom when you're up in that stretch between Stony Pass and Elk Creek, where you're 32 miles from any trees and there's nowhere really for you to tuck away and hide. What do you think? Any recommendations for the listeners out there?
Why do I feel like you're calling me out?
For those of you, this is terrific, by the way. So when I hiked with CT Mom leaving Lake City, I set up my little GoPro and I was going to do a time lapse. And in the corner of the time lapse, she steps off from the group and then starts squatting to pee. So I have this great shot of her and I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's not this kind of channel. Right. And, anyway, so it's a great part of the time lapse. It's a little mini silent drama that plays out, and then she stepped off. But yeah, so what about you, CT Mom? What do you think about those sort of moments? How do you find privacy, or does it really matter? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is going to be individual, and I know that it's one of those things that you think about before you leave for trail, and it doesn't matter at all, like Debbie was saying, once you get out there. I will pee anywhere in front of anyone, and I do not care. I will pee on the trail. I do not care. And the idea of taking time to go find a place, like I can't. I can't do it. So, but not everyone is like that, and that's fine. And I do have a funny peeing story. So I was at the bottom of Foose's Creek, and I haven't seen anyone for 3 hours. And I'm peeing, and this fisherman.
3 hours you've been peeing?
No, I've been hiking for
Need some
3
cranberry
hours. I haven't
juice.
seen anybody. And this 75-year-old fisherman pops up out of a bush and is like, ah! And I'm like, hey man, what's up? And I continue to have a normal conversation while urinating, and he was mortified. But I thought it was great.
That's terrific. Yeah.
So get over it. You'll be fine. No one cares, is my advice. But if it is a big deal to you, there are certainly places you can get behind rocks, you can get behind trees, you can plan it. But
yeah. You know, Happy Storm has a similar sentiment here. And she says that at this point in her life, she's not modest at all. If someone looks, they should have known. She's 66. More power to you there, Happy Storm. I think this is one of those things where it's also a space where the men in the audience can get better about just things like not making jokes about women not pooping, that kind of thing. And just knowing that these are human bodies and these are people who are going to have the same needs, and being respectful of that, and just kind of matter of fact, really, this is what you need. And Jules has been watching the channel for quite a while here, and said, and I think this is pretty common. This is me with the old number 2, is every time I tried to pee on trail, without fail, a biker would come by. I think that's one way to really expedite the process, because they come by so quickly, it'll scare the piss out of you, right?
I find people are good about it, though. When you're on trail and you go off to the side, say you want the privacy, other hikers go by. I find that there's just common courtesy. They know, okay, if you're over to the side, we know, and we'll look this way. Everyone seems to know. I know if I'm out at a distance and I can see someone off in the corner, I just keep going about your business.
Yeah, I think it seems to be, by and large, the culture of the trail. And if somebody's acting any differently than that, then to Trekkie's point, that should raise your spidey senses. And this is maybe somebody you don't want to hike near. And now I want to switching gears just a little bit. I want to ask if there's anything that you think people should know, especially because this whole thing, the questions were written by a man. And so what kind of questions do you think would be better to ask, or what kinds of things do you think we need to cover if we're thinking about considerations for women hiking the trail? Are there any topics that are pertinent that maybe I have as a blind spot right now that we should talk about before we wrap up?
Can I make one more P comment?
Please do. Yeah, I was hoping for it. I wasn't ready to move on.
As you get older in your backpacking career as a woman, don't wait. The longer you wait, the more trouble you're going to get into. So to some degree, you can plan things. If you're anything like me, I do horrible with backpacking food. It does not do well with my GI tract, and so you can't plan everything. For women that are very modest, there is a skirt. Well, there's several hiking skirts. Purple Rain makes a really good one that you can slide over hiking pants, and then you've got a little bit of coverage if you can't get tree coverage.
That's a really great tip there as well. Absolutely.
I was going to say that I used hiking pants forever.
Yeah.
And I always have to use a belt because I have my waist, and just fumbling with that just got so old. So I use hiking skirts, and I'll put yoga pants on if it's chilly, and then just take those off and just wear the skirt. But the skirt it's a godsend. That made a big difference for me. I don't wear pants hardly ever anymore.
That's great insight. I've seen quite a bit more skirts showing up on trail, and you have to imagine that it's probably better for things like chafing as well, because it's more breathable, that kind of thing. Definitely worth a shot if you've not tried it. And I think, I'm not switching to a kilt anytime soon, but I know that kilts have become pretty common for men on trail, and I have to imagine it's for very similar reasons as well. Details mentions that when you're hiking, you're probably going to have to pee a lot more with all the electrolytes. And so, I think one of the things, kind of to reiterate a little bit of what CT Mom said, I went to an undergrad where we had the showers where it was basically one room with a bunch of shower heads, and everybody in the dorm either got over it right away, or it was just a headache for them. They would set their alarm for 2 a.m. and kind of, to Trekkie's point as well, not waiting, right? You're going to need to go. And if you're through hiking, you're hiking 500 miles, you're going to need to go a lot. And so it makes a lot of sense to just kind of embrace that Happy Storm sentiment of modesty. I don't want to tell people how to feel about their own modesty, but there is some logic to just being like, this is a human thing, and we're just going to do it, and we're going to make the best of it. And this is not going to be the defining moment. I'll also say that for a lot of people I hear, And this is for men and women. A lot of people get really nervous about, or sort of they get turned off from hiking because they don't want to poop in the woods. And what I'll say, and tell me if this is, if it's your experience, then feel free to chime in. If you don't want to talk about poop, that's okay as well. My experience has been that sort of like sleeping through the night, it just kind of, you get used to it to the point that it's not a big deal. And you just kind of, it's not something that I enjoy. I'm not going to like do that in my backyard because it's, but ultimately things like pooping in the backyard or pooping on the trail is not a big deal. You kind of get used to it and it doesn't really become this event. But when you start, by all means, it feels like, oh no, this is going to be an ordeal. And it has that sort of weight and gravity the first few times you do it, at least, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to just sort of, humans have been pooping outside longer than they've been pooping with indoor plumbing. So it is a natural, normal thing. And it works itself out. It's definitely a concern. I mean, all of this stuff is a concern for, and it just is okay. I mean, as long as you're doing leave no trace. I dig a cat hole the night before, and then
that's a key. That's great. Yeah.
Hope that I need it in the morning in the spot that I am, which doesn't always happen. Sometimes there's those emergency situations. Thank you, pad thai dehydrated meal. But like you figure it out. Like, we're animals. Like I can use sticks and rocks and
well, that one tip is clutch for anybody. Dig a cat hole the night before. You're going to need it.
For sure.
Dig it the night before, and then you, especially, when you're hiking and your metabolism starts ramping up, you'll wake up and it's time, and it's not super easy when you're trying to dig a cat hole, and in the middle of that emergency, your body sort of squeezes on your stomach a little bit. Not to be too gross, but I want to talk a little bit about that. Actually, the pad thai kind of made me think here of what LG said, and it kind of ties a little bit to one of the things Trekkie said. So I think here, kind of turning the conversation just a little bit, the caloric intake difference between men and women. I think this one can be complicated by how athletic the person is. I'm not a big athlete, so I don't need a ton of calories. And I mean, I tend to eat a lot. My trail name's Snackbox, but what I do want to ask about is any dietary recommendations, either things that people should or shouldn't do. So the pad thai obviously sounds like not a great idea. And Trekkie mentioned that GI systems, especially from camping food, can get messed up pretty quickly. Brenda, I saw it looked like you might have some ideas for food. I saw you unmute your mic there. So yeah, let's turn it over to you first here.
Yes, I recognized pretty quickly in my first season of section hiking that I'm really affected by high altitude. My appetite is decreased. I was really impacted by a lot of sodium in some of the pre-packaged backpacker food meals. And so I started learning how to dehydrate a lot of my own ingredients to kind of create a pantry so that I can put together like a burrito bowl, or spaghetti with Alfredo and asparagus is like another one of my backpacking meal favorites. And also to have the right kind of portions for myself. It's so difficult when you make one of those pre-made backpacking meals and it's enough to feed 2 people. You don't want to carry the leftovers and you don't want to eat it all either. And so I find that it really helps me making my own foods for not only portion control, but complete control over the ingredients inside. And it has just really helped with my performance on trail and feeling strong and good without feeling bloated or just underfed if I'm not eating enough.
And I have to agree with that. I had the same. I didn't dehydrate, but I bought the Harmony House. They have like the dehydrated veggies and things you can buy. I put together our own meals for quite a few, and we did better with those than like the pad thai and things like that. We did have some of that, but we did. And I didn't have an appetite. It was hard to eat. And I don't normally eat sweets much, but I would do cold coffee and Snickers for breakfast because I got to where I couldn't do that oatmeal. I had this great breakfast plan, and it was just, I didn't have any energy. So Snickers, as that worked for me. And the dehydrated meals with the Harmony House food.
Yeah, that Harmony House is really a great move. Yeah, Trekkie.
I had the same experience as Freckles. It's been years now where I've been putting together my own meals. It drove me nuts that the single serve backpacking meals, there would always be like 3/4 left. It pissed me off so much. So I started making my own meals simply for that. And then I'm an incredibly obnoxiously picky eater to start with, and it gets worse on trail. So like there's maybe 10% of the backpacking meals that I would eat even in a good situation, and you get tired of having the same thing over and over again. So it's been a game changer for me to make my own meals.
Yeah, I think it takes there's a little bit of a learning curve to it, and you really have to test it out. It goes back almost an hour to when CT Mom talked about the shakedown hikes, testing out what is a good portion. And that's one of the things those Harmony House ingredients really help with. And especially if you find some recipes you like. What I did is I bought the Harmony House there. For those of you who don't know, it's I think it's about $60, and they give you little sample, like 3-ounce bags of all different ingredients. And then you try out some stuff, and you find some great recipes, and you look online. And once you find some that work, then you can go and buy bigger containers of the single ingredients that you find yourself using. It's part of the fun of planning the hike, and it's for me where I would recommend people spending a lot of their planning energy, because I think we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how many miles we're going to hike each day and where we're going to camp. And where we're going to camp is just a fool's errand. You can plan out every spot you're going to camp in, and it's not going to happen. I would wager if you plan 30 camp spots, you're camping at one, and the rest of them will all be different. But I think that's a really great one to sort of dial in that pack and spend your time figuring out what kind of meals you'd like. It's also why, unless I had a dietary restriction, I probably would limit the amount of resupply that I would do by way of sending ahead ramen noodles and mashed potatoes, that sort of thing, unless I was doing like you're describing, Trekkie, where these are specific meals that I've made that I know are dialed into what I like, have the right nutritional value, the right size. Those are all good. It's also, in some respects, kind of an ethical issue. If we're already wasting so much food as Americans, that if you can spend some time making sure that you don't have that food waste, it's really, really good thing. My hiking buddy from last year, Winging It here, wanted to talk a little bit. I think he really just wanted to brag about losing 25 pounds on the trail here. I think he's want to talk a little bit about weight loss. I don't know if we really need to talk a whole lot about weight loss, but I did want to point out he did lose 25 pounds and has taken off on the adventure of a lifetime here, running ultra marathons in November. So I'm going to visit him in Dallas and say my goodbyes to him, because there's no way he's surviving that one when the time comes. Great. Any other thoughts? Anything else? So we have just a few more minutes. I want us to wrap this up in the next 8 minutes or so. We've been going a solid hour and 12 minutes, so I want to be respectful of your time, and but I also want to leave some opportunity for sort of throwing in ideas that maybe I overlooked, or any other thoughts or advice you have for women in the crowd thinking about hiking the trail, or even men trying to figure out how to be better community members. What do you think?
I'd like to throw out there that when I started planning to do the whole CT trail, I knew that I had to section hike it as a mom with grade school aged children still. And I knew that my odds of completing it faster would be better if I was willing to hike it out of order and solo, at times solo, because my schedule is so atypical. I tend to have Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays more open, and not many people can take off work to section hike with me. So I told myself that I had to get comfortable with my own company, because I'd rather do the trail alone than not at all. And if I waited for people who were able and willing to join me on this crazy adventure, I might be waiting for a really long time. And I didn't want that. So I just steeled my mentality toward the fact that I might be doing a lot of this alone. And I discovered things and strengths about myself that I never knew I had. And I actually really like soloing. In some regards, I actually prefer it. So that's what I would just encourage people to do, that either you can do it by yourself if you have to, and know that you'll meet people on trail, or you might wait a really long time and not get opportunity to do so at all. So
I think that's great advice. I think that's something that a lot of people probably needed to hear, for sure.
And I wanted to say too that even with all the backpacking and hiking we've done, I had doubts. I had doubts when that I could do it, not so much physically, and because I worked out and I work out, so I wasn't that so much, but the mental. Could I overcome those? I'm tired today. I don't want to do this. Or during Holy Cross Wilderness, mosquitoes love me, and I have allergic reactions to them, and I had bruises and welts, and I'm taking antihistamines. And I had moments, what am I doing this for? So I want to just say that it's normal, I think, to get out and have those moments. And it does give you that confidence when you overcome it. But I did have that. So many people say, oh, I have these doubts. And people don't. And I had some real doubts. And even Miller, he never really had doubts. But even on the trail, there were mornings he'd get up, I don't want to hike today. I'm like, okay, so what are we going to do? I don't know what you want to do. So that's normal. And I think that's important that people know that that's normal to have those feelings.
Yeah, I think that's really important that, you never really get to this point where you're just, everything is easy going. It's, the highs are going to stay high. I think the lows tend to get a little less lower. You sort of, to Freckles' point earlier, once you've been through it a couple of times, you start realizing that this is a low and this is temporary. It's not forever. And you kind of push through it a little bit. I will say that of all the things that we know about Miller, he does one thing we know for sure he wants, and that is to stay married to you another 40 years. So I want to wish you all a happy anniversary coming up in March. I think that's really just terrific. And you'll love to see it. There was a really great video where, Miller hiked without you once. And so if anybody can track that one down, I encourage you to do so. And it's aspirational because he was reflecting on your partnership throughout. And I thought it was really a beautifully done video. So go track that down if you haven't already. Any other thoughts here from Trekkie or CT Mom? What do you think?
I would echo some of the others or reiterate Freckles' point that, if it's getting out there solo is your only option, it's 100% worth it. And I actually very much prefer solo the majority of the time. I can count on one hand the number of people I'll let come with me on my adventures. Because again, we are conditioned to be people pleasers, and we will be so worried about everyone else's experience or pace, or how are we contributing to their experience, and can we make it better? And going solo relieves a lot of that pressure.
I think that's a great point. And it also, it speaks to that idea that kind of CT Mom was talking about, the mantras, but really thinking about the framing of things. And so instead of thinking like, oh no, I'm going solo, really reframing it to say kind of, hell yeah, I'm going solo. And this is a thing that I can do, and that there are advantages to it. So Freckles had that point earlier about, there's sort of two sides to the coin. And so at that point, you don't necessarily have to ignore the other side, but it's where you turn your attention can make a big difference, especially for those solo hikes. CT Mom, you get the last word here. What do you think?
I just, specifically for women or people who identify as women, I feel like get out there. If this is something that you saw a YouTube video, or you belong to a Facebook group, or God forbid all you watched was that Wild movie, go do it. Go on day hikes. Go, run down the mountain closest to you and see how you feel. And it took me a long time. I stumbled. I came off trail multiple times and felt awful about coming off trail. And then I kept going, and now I'm a super duper badass, and you can be like me. Yeah. And, just keep your wits about you. As far as the female thing goes, stay with hikers. My only big mistake I didn't get to in this was I stayed in a hotel in Leadville by myself because the hostel was full, and I didn't sleep. I was terrified. It was awful. Stay at the hostels. Stay with the people that you were hiking with. Do what you need to do. That being said, the other flip side is leave your group if you need to. See ya. If they're not serving you, then you're out. So that's me.
Yeah, that's an important part of the sort of culture of the trail, and it kind of speaks to a little bit of what Trekkie was saying earlier. The thing that's nice about joining in groups is it's also, people don't tend to get their feelings hurt when you have to go on and kind of, we had, I hiked with you all until Stony Pass, and then I took a detour, and it was just, there was no it was just, this is what I'm doing. This is my journey. And so respecting that this is your hike and you have to hike your hike, but also knowing that people are likely to be fine with you if you need to go ahead or slow down. And so think of the trail, think of it a little more like kind of like an accordion or a spring, where you might be in a clump together, but there might be days where you stretch out or you go back. It's one of the reasons I liked hiking with Winging It. If we got separated, it wasn't a big deal. We knew we would catch up with each other. And ultimately we did get separated for the last 200 miles of the trail, and still ended up finishing. And it was just what it is, So I think this is really helpful. It's really, I'm really grateful for all of your insights and all of your time. I feel like I've learned so much and taken away quite a bit of great insight. And it's great to share trails with people who are so thoughtful. And I'm grateful again. You all gave up quite a bit of your time here on a Sunday night, and that's not lost on me. So thank you all. Thank you all so much. I'd like to ask, not like to ask here. Let me see. I've been working on all these little slides here. And I'm supposed to, like a good YouTuber, I'm supposed to mention for everybody to please like and subscribe. But I also want to, since I'm not the only YouTuber here, if you like and subscribe here, which I really hope you will, and join this community, we're going to be talking next about common trail injuries, and so how to prevent them. And the term that the speaker, he's a hiking buddy of mine who runs a functional fitness gym out of Portland, Oregon. He's going to be talking about prehabbing injuries. So if you've had an injury before that might give you trouble on the trail, we're going to be talking about how you prehab it. How do you make sure that you're set up to have a successful hike if you have a history of injury, which I do. I'm falling apart at the seams, everybody. I broke my back once. I've got arthritis in my ankle from when I was a chubby champ. And so there are all sorts of different injuries and ailments. But I'm looking forward to that talk. And then also, if you do like and subscribe to this channel, I hope that you'll go over there and check out Mad Hippie's Life. Again, those videos are great. Start with the Indian Trail Ridge, that segment 27 video. I thought that was one of my favorites of the whole thing. But again, getting a lot of that great beta. So thank you, Freckles. Thank you, CT Mom. Thank you, Debbie of Mad Hippies. And thank you, Trekkie. And again, thank you, everybody who stopped in and watched today. Really looking forward to continuing this conversation as the years go forward. So thank you all. I think that about wraps it up. If the four of you will just stick around for a minute, I'm going to end the broadcast and then talk with you all for a second. Then I'll let you go. I promise.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for discussing this topic. Really
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm a little bit of a caveman at times, but I'm trying. So thank you for that, Trekkie, and thank you again.